Hey folks, tonight we're plunging headfirst into one of history's most bizarre rabbit holes, the twisted world of medieval royalty and the catastrophic consequences of marrying your cousin's generation after generation. Spoiler alert, it doesn't end well. Genetically speaking, you probably wouldn't survive this lineage, but damn if it isn't fascinating. Before you get cozy, smash that like button and subscribe, but only if you genuinely dig what I'm serving here. Quick question, what city are you tuning in from tonight? And what's the clock saying in your time zone? Drop it in the comments. I'm always amazed seeing how far this little history cult stretches. Now, dim those lights, maybe crank up a fan for some ambient white noise, and let's slide into tonight's journey together. Picture this, crackling hearth fires in a stone hall, candlelight glinting off silver goblets, and a young noblewoman in velvet robes being introduced to her future husband, who just happens to be her cousin, or uncle, or nephew. Welcome to medieval European aristocracy, where bloodlines trumped biology and love had absolutely zero to do with marriage. The term inbred packs a punch today, but back then, pure strategy. Dynasties like the Habsburgs, Capetians, and Trastamaras weren't intermarrying for kicks. They were playing 4D chess to hoard power, land, and legitimacy. Marry a cousin? You keep your castles. Marry a foreigner? Suddenly your heirs being raised in enemy territory. The logic was coldly precise, even if the consequences were problematic. Generation after generation, this thinking created genetic whirlpools that spawned some of Europe's most fascinating train wrecks. Tonight you'll meet women who were daughters of double first cousins, nieces married to uncles, sisters wed to their first cousin once removed. These aren't abstract genealogical quirks. They were real women navigating impossible lives, wrestling with fierce loyalties while exhibiting shocking symptoms of royal DNA, playing musical chairs. We'll tour stone palaces in Spain, gloomy Austrian castles, and glittering French courts. You'll watch empires rise and collapse around these women, most of whom, let's be real, never had a say in the matter. Take the Habsburgs, the undisputed Olympic champions of European inbreeding. Their family tree isn't a tree so much as a wreath. They built a global empire on marriages that progressively tightened the genetic noose until it practically strangled them. While we'll spotlight some infamous male Habsburgs later, it's the women who bore the generational load, both politically and genetically. These were the mothers of kings and queens, the architects of empire, and the unfortunate carriers of some spectacularly unlucky traits. But the Habsburgs didn't have a monopoly. The Capetians of France, the Trastamaras of Spain, even England's Plantagenets all dipped toes in the same shallow gene pool. The goal was always the same: consolidate power, prevent civil war, lock down dynastic legitimacy. But the collateral damage included bitter feuds, forced marriages, and generations of noble women navigating a world where family meant everything, and somehow also meant way too much. What's wild is how glaring the side effects became. Elongated jaws, fertility nightmares, recurring mental illness, stillbirths, and bizarre skull shapes kept cropping up in royal lineages. Yet nobody seemed eager to change course. Even the church, which technically forbade incestuous marriages beyond a certain degree, kept handing out papal dispensations like holy hall passes for cousin marriages, all in the name of keeping the peace. Here's the kicker. Modern geneticists have studied these bloodlines and confirmed what medieval matchmakers refused to see. Inbreeding coefficients, yes, that's a real scientific term, are measurable, and several royal offspring scored numbers comparable to children of sibling unions, some of the highest ever recorded. Charles II of Spain, whose tragic tale we'll save for the finale, couldn't chew properly, couldn't walk unaided, and likely had the mental capacity of a 5-year-old. Oh, and most of his aunts and uncles were also his cousins. Naturally, of course, not every inbred royal woman suffered visibly. Some were brilliant rulers, masterful diplomats, beloved queens. Historians still debate how much inbreeding actually shaped personality and mental stability. For instance, was Joanna the Mad of Castile truly insane, or just trapped in a political nightmare where her erratic behavior, was exaggerated to stop her from ruling? Was her daughter's melancholy genetic destiny, or the result of being crushed between power and duty? These questions haunt every thread of these women's stories. How much was nature? How much was nurture? They weren't passive chess pieces. They were queens, regents, and empire-shaping mothers. Some ruled directly, others through husbands or sons, but all carried a dynastic burden their male counterparts never faced. A prince might die in battle or drink himself to death, but a princess? Her job was to marry whoever the crown demanded and pump out heirs, no matter how many miscarriages, deformities, or depressive episodes came with the territory. Now, let's dive into the tangled web of inbred nobility with a woman who might as well be the poster child for what happens when your entire family tree folds in on itself, like a genetic origami disaster. Isabella of Habsburg. If you've ever wondered what it's like to be the product of multiple generations of cousin marriages, well, meet Isabella. She wasn't just part of the Habsburg dynasty. She was the Habsburg dynasty, rolled into one velvet-draped, genetically looped package. Born in 1501, Isabella was the daughter of Philip the Handsome and Joanna of Castile. Yes, that Joanna, the one history calls the Mad. We'll get to her soon. Here's the kicker. Isabella's parents were both grandchildren of the same royal couple, Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile. That means her family tree was already bending awkwardly back onto itself from the moment she took her first breath in Brussels. By the time she hit marriageable age, which, naturally, was around 13, her worth wasn't about charm or wit. It was about blood, that pure, undiluted Habsburg blood. She was married off to Christian II of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, a man contemporaries described as mercurial, which, let's be honest, is just a polite way of saying he was probably a nightmare. Their marriage was political, like every royal union of the era, but with an extra layer of desperation. Christian needed allies, and the Habsburgs wanted influence in Scandinavia. Isabella, she was the living, breathing vessel for that influence. Her womb was now official state policy. And here's where things get messy, because of course they do. Christian wasn't exactly stable. He had moments of charm, sure, and he seemed to like Isabella well enough. But he also had a favorite mistress, Dynasties Sigbritsdatter, whom he flaunted at court even after marrying his Habsburg princess. Dynasties was low-born, not even nobility, and Isabella had to sit there in her Danish castle, pregnant with the future, while her husband paraded his mistress around like a prized stallion. For a woman raised to accept political marriages as part of the royal gig, that must have stung. But Isabella held her ground. She bore Christian's 6 children, 3 of whom survived infancy, a miracle in itself, given the gene pool and the general medieval lack of hygiene. One son, John, would die young, but her daughter Dorothea would go on to marry. You guessed it, another cousin. Isabella's influence at court grew, especially after Dynasties died suddenly. Poisoned cherries? Maybe. The truth is murky. Some whispered Isabella or her allies had a hand in it, but there's no proof, just a sudden vacancy in the royal mistress department and a queen stepping into real power. Yet the genetic baggage of her ancestry didn't disappear. Isabella herself suffered from mysterious illnesses. Modern historians suspect hemophilia or another inherited disorder. She died at just 24, officially from a sudden illness, the medieval catch-all for everything from tuberculosis to genetic dysfunction. Here's a fascinating detail. Isabella was fluent in 5 languages thanks to her Habsburg upbringing. Not just basic phrases, but full diplomatic fluency in Latin, Castilian, Flemish, French, and German. Her letters reveal a sharp mind, a dry wit, and a keen understanding of the political chessboard. She wasn't just a royal incubator, she was a player. Now, here's where scholars still butt heads. Was Isabella a victim of her family's obsession with purity, or just unlucky in a deadly era? Some point to her children's weak health and her own early death as clear signs of genetic fragility. Others argue that early mortality was common in the 16th century, even for royals. True, but the Habsburgs' increasingly closed gene pool makes that argument harder to swallow. What's undeniable? Isabella's children carried forward even more concentrated royal blood, tightening the genetic spiral. Her grandson, Maximilian II, would marry his first cousin, and their children? Let's just say their jawlines could cut glass, and not in a good way. One eerie truth about Isabella's life? It feels quiet in retrospect. No wars, no grand scandals, no famous paintings. Yet her DNA echoes through European history. Her blood ran in the veins of emperors, kings, and doomed heirs. If power is measured by legacy, then Isabella was more powerful than most of the men around her. She just never got a crown to show for it. You almost want to whisper back through time. Hey, maybe skip the cousin? Maybe tell your daughter to marry outside the family. But she couldn't. That was the game. And she played it as well as any Habsburg could, from the quiet Danish courts to the ruthless dynastic chessboard. Isabella of Habsburg didn't live long, but what she passed on would shape Europe for centuries. And a lot of it wasn't exactly healthy. Now that you've met Isabella of Habsburg, let's plunge deeper into the shadowy corridors of royal heredity to confront her infamous mother, Joanna of Castile, better known to history as Joanna the Mad. You've probably heard the nickname before. Visions of a barefoot queen wandering castle halls, mumbling to herself, or clinging to her dead husband's coffin like some macabre romantic figure. And yes, shockingly, some of that actually happened. But the full story of Joanna? It's less about madness and more about tragedy. A perfect storm of dynastic pressure, psychological torment, and yes, a heavy dose of concentrated family genetics. Joanna entered the world in 1479 as the daughter of Europe's ultimate power couple, Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile, the Catholic monarchs who unified Spain and bankrolled Columbus voyages. Their marriage was the ultimate political merger, and they expected their children to follow suit. Joanna, their third child, was intelligent, introspective, and deeply devout, with eyes that reportedly smoldered when angry. But there was one glaring issue. Her family tree already had that classic royal kink. Her parents were second cousins, not extreme by medieval standards, but the warning signs of genetic looping were flickering. As a young woman, Joanna was shipped off to Flanders to marry Philip the Handsome. Yes, that was his actual nickname, son of Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I. This was meant to forge a mega-alliance between Spain and Burgundy. But here's the twist. Unlike most arranged royal marriages, Joanna and Philip were obsessed with each other, passionately, destructively so. The kind of chemistry that made courtiers uncomfortable. You might think, how romantic. But this isn't a fairy tale, it's a slow-motion train wreck. Philip was gorgeous, ambitious, and painfully aware of his own appeal. Joanna, hopelessly in love, spiraled into violent jealousy as Philip openly took mistresses. She reportedly screamed, threw objects, and demanded names. Court gossip claimed she once attacked a lady-in-waiting with scissors over a flirtatious glance. Was this mental illness, or the rage of a woman trapped in a gilded cage? Things worsened when her mother, Queen Isabella, died, making Joanna Queen of Castile overnight. But Philip immediately moved to declare her unfit to rule, with her father Ferdinand backing the play. Both men wanted control, and both used Joanna's so-called madness as their excuse. What followed was a systematic gaslighting campaign, isolating her, controlling her attendance, rewriting her narrative. Then came Philip's sudden death in 1506, officially from drinking cold water after a tennis match, sure. Joanna's grief turned gothic. She had his corpse embalmed, refused burial for years, and traveled Castile with the casket, demanding monasteries pray for his soul. Some accounts claim she opened the coffin periodically to gaze at him. Others say she banned women from approaching, fearing they'd seduce his corpse. Okay, that sounds unhinged, but modern historians side-eye the narrative. Yes, Joanna's behavior was extreme, but was it madness or weaponized grief? She'd lost her husband, been separated from her children, and was surrounded by men gaslighting her into believing she was insane. When you're imprisoned in a freezing castle with no allies, madness might be the only sane response. The genetic bomb? Joanna's parents were related. Her husband was her second cousin. Their daughter, Isabella, from our last chapter, carried bloodlines now spiraling inward. You can trace Joanna's DNA straight to Charles II of Spain, whose family tree looked less like a tree and more like a tumbleweed. Here's a bizarre historical nugget. 16th century doctors blamed Joanna's instability on a wandering womb, believing her uterus had literally migrated to her brain. One physician's notes described treatments involving herbal compresses, prayer, and, wait for it, a recommended exorcism. Modern scholars still debate whether Joanna had bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, or was simply a victim of political sabotage. One theory suggests PTSD from losing multiple children. She was barred from raising them. For nearly 50 years, she was confined in Tordesillas, watching her children die one by one, denied even the right to mourn. Yet technically, she remained Queen of Castile until death. Her signature still sealed decrees. Her existence still mattered, if only as a figurehead. And the dynasty rolled on, built on her blood and suffering. So what's the takeaway? Joanna wasn't just the mad one. She was a woman crushed between inbreeding, male ambition, and a world that pathologized female emotion. Her children would shape Europe. Her story a haunting lesson in how pure blood can curdle into poison. Next, we'll meet Blanche of Castile, another woman caught in the French-Spanish dynastic whirlpool. But first, let Joanna linger in your mind. Alone in her fortress, her world shrinking, her love unburied, her name etched into history not for who she was, but for what they made her seem. Now your gaze drifts toward another candlelit corridor, where the scent of burning rushes mingles with centuries-old ambition. Tonight we cross the Pyrenees to meet Blanche of Castile, a queen who proves that even in this genetic horror show, some women wielded power with terrifying precision. Born in 1188, Blanche was the daughter of Alfonso VIII of Castile and Eleanor of England. Yes, that Eleanor, daughter of Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine. This made her a genetic cocktail of Plantagenet ambition and Trastamara pride, with a family tree already showing early signs of looping. When you're royalty in medieval Europe, marrying cousins isn't scandalous, it's efficient. At age 12, Blanche was bartered to France to marry Prince Louis, future Louis VIII. But here's the twist, she wasn't the first choice. The French originally wanted her sister Urraca, until a last-minute switcheroo that historians still side-eye. Why? Some say Urraca was too Spanish. Others whisper she showed early signs of the Castilian instability that would later plague Joanna. Whatever the reason, Blanche got the crown, and oh, did she wear it well. Her marriage to Louis in 1200 was textbook political union, but Blanche was no porcelain doll. When Louis became king, she didn't just host banquets, she commanded armies. And when he died in 1226, leaving their 12-year-old son, the future Saint Louis IX, as king, Blanche didn't faint into her handkerchief. She declared herself regent of France and ruled with the iron grace of a woman who'd been waiting her whole life for the chance. Now let's talk bloodlines. Blanche and Louis were third cousins, close enough to require a papal dispensation, but standard for the era. Yet their marriage was another stitch in the tightening fabric of dynastic inbreeding. Blanche bore 13 children, because medieval queens were basically Olympic-level baby factories, though only a few survived. Their son Louis IX became a revered king saint, but scholars note his siblings had alarmingly high mortality rates, even for the Middle Ages. One theory, Blanche and Louis shared Plantagenet ancestry, possibly carrying immune weaknesses. Another darker rumor claims Blanche was so obsessed with her son's purity that she discouraged his marital relations. Some even whispered of an unnatural attachment. Probably just court gossip, but it speaks volumes about how a powerful woman was viewed in the 13th century. Here's the kicker. Blanche didn't just survive this system, she mastered it. For years, she governed France during her son's minority, then did it again when he left on crusade. She crushed rebellions, navigated famines, and outmaneuvered the Pope, all while presumably wearing one of those giant medieval headdresses that could double as siege weapons. but the toll lingered. Letters suggest Blanche suffered crippling migraines and melancholia, the medieval catch-all for depression, hormonal issues, or inherited conditions. When she died in 1252, chroniclers described her hallucinating saints. Was it spiritual ecstasy or a stroke from decades of stress? A lesser-known fact: Blanche was one of the first queens to fund universities, backing theology studies at the University of Paris. So while managing war and famine, she also quietly kick-started Europe's intellectual revival. You can almost see her in some candlelit scriptorium, glaring at noisy scholars like a medieval librarian. Blanche of Castile stands apart. Not the most inbred queen, but a warning of how medieval marriage politics began folding bloodlines inward. She ruled with a velvet-gloved fist, her legacy echoing in the Sainte-Chapelle's stained glass and the quiet strength of women who refused to be mere genetic vessels. Next, we sail to Portugal, where Eleanor of Portugal will marry her own uncle, because at this point, why not? But first, let Blanche's ghost linger. A woman who played the game so well, they had to invent new rules to contain her. Now let's step into the golden Iberian sunlight of the 15th century, where palace courtyards shimmer with the weight of dynastic ambition, and where Eleanor of Portugal discovers that marrying your uncle isn't even considered that weird in royal circles. Born in 1434 into the House of Avish, Eleanor was practically pre-wrapped for political marriage, educated, pious, and already swimming in the shallow end of the royal gene pool. Her father was King Edward of Portugal, her mother Eleanor of Aragon, meaning her bloodline was a perfect cocktail of Portuguese and Spanish nobility, with all the genetic redundancy that implies. At 16, she was shipped north to marry Frederick III, Holy Roman Emperor. Sounds prestigious? Sure, until you realize Frederick was her cousin through multiple tangled lineages, technically her uncle by marriage. So reluctant to commit that he didn't meet her until the wedding day. His first reaction? She's prettier than her portrait. Charming. Their 1452 wedding was a glittering diplomatic spectacle, but the marriage itself? A study in mismatched misery. Eleanor, raised in Portugal's vibrant courts, found Frederick's austere German court suffocating. He counted coins, she longed for music. Their letters read like early modern marriage counseling transcripts. She complained of loneliness. He criticized her emotional excess. At one point, Eleanor allegedly sighed. My husband would rather audit ledgers than kiss his wife. Yet they dutifully produced 5 children, 3 surviving, including Maximilian I, the future emperor who'd marry another cousin and tighten the Habsburg genetic noose further. Now, the biological grenade. Both Eleanor and Frederick shared ancestors from the Aragonese and Burgundian houses, meaning their union concentrated already recycled DNA. Their son Maximilian inherited the early hints of the Habsburg Jaw, that infamous protruding chin that would later look like it could open wine bottles. But the real tragedy? Eleanor's health. Modern historians suspect porphyria, a hereditary blood disorder causing sensitivity to light, abdominal pain, and melancholia, that medieval dumping ground for any unexplained female suffering. She died at 32, officially from childbirth complications, but really from years of being a stranger in a cold court. Her homesick letters to brother King Alfonso V filled with quiet despair. A haunting detail, Eleanor's voice survives in her own words. In one letter, she describes feeling like a songbird caged in stone. For a woman whose body was treated as a diplomatic bargaining chip, that metaphor cuts deep. Why does she matter? Because Eleanor's bloodline, already kinked from generations of cousin marriages, flowed straight into Charles V's veins. Her story is the turning point where dynastic ambition began outpacing biological reality. As one scholar put it, the Habsburgs stopped marrying to strengthen alliances. They married because they'd run out of outsiders who met their standards of purity. Next, we'll meet Margaret of Austria, Eleanor's granddaughter, and one of the few Habsburg women who turned this genetic gilded cage into a throne room. But first, let Eleanor's ghost linger. A homesick princess who brought cinnamon and sorrow to the heart of an empire. Fast forward to 1480 in Brussels. where we meet Margaret of Austria, a woman born into a genetic labyrinth so convoluted that family reunions probably required flowcharts. As granddaughter of Eleanor of Portugal, Margaret didn't just inherit Habsburg blood, she became its most cunning puppeteer. Daughter of Maximilian I and Mary of Burgundy, Margaret was orphaned by age 2 when her mother died in a horseback riding accident, because medieval nobility treated horses like modern teens treat motorcycles. Immediately, she was treated as a dynastic bargaining chip, betrothed at age 3 to the future Charles VIII of France, and shipped off to be raised as his future queen. But in a plot twist worthy of a soap opera, Charles dumped Margaret to Mary and of Brittany, that territorial goldmine, in a dress. At 17, Margaret returned to her father's court, humiliated but far from broken. Her next marriage? One of Castile, heir to the Spanish throne, and yes, another cousin. Their union lasted barely a year before one succumbed to tuberculosis, though poison rumors flourished like mold in a damp castle. Here's where Margaret flips the script. Instead of fading into widowed obscurity, she became governor of the Netherlands, twice. Fluent in 6 languages, she negotiated treaties, managed commerce, and essentially ran a nation while wearing gowns so stiff with embroidery they could stand on their own. The genetic paradox. Though Margaret married cousins like it was her job, she somehow dodged the worst Habsburg traits. No grotesque jawline, no apparent madness. Was she the exception that proved the rule, or proof that intelligence could override inbreeding's toll? A delightful detail. Margaret kept a pet monkey named Barble and collected rare books. Her correspondence with humanist Erasmus reveals wicked humor. She once described a courtier as having the charm of a leaky wine barrel. Yet even she couldn't escape the family curse. As guardian of her nephew, Charles V, future Holy Roman Emperor, she arranged his marriage to another cousin, Isabella of Portugal, tightening the genetic spiral. When Margaret died in 1530 from a tetanus-infected nail wound, Europe lost perhaps the last Habsburg woman who could outthink her own DNA. Next, we cross to England, where Catherine of Aragon's womb becomes the battleground for empires. But first, toast to Margaret, the aunt Europe deserved, but didn't inherit. Now we arrive at the court of Henry VIII, where the scent of burning tapestries mixes with desperation, and where Catherine of Aragon becomes living proof that even the most pious queen can't pray away genetic destiny. Daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, yes, those Catholic monarchs, Catherine entered the world in 1485 as a walking political treaty. Her parents were second cousins, making her part of the Trastamara dynasty's carefully curated gene pool. At 3 years old, she was promised to Arthur, Prince of Wales, and by 15, she was shivering in damp England with her dowry and a retinue of homesick Spanish ladies. The 1501 wedding was pure political theater, golden goblets, Latin vows, and a very public bedding ceremony where the court literally watched the teenage couple climb into bed. 5 months later, Arthur was dead, possibly from the sweating sickness, leaving Catherine stranded with unpaid dowry and a burning question. Had the marriage been consummated? This technicality would later spark the English Reformation when Henry VIII used it to demand an annulment. Enter Henry VIII, Arthur's younger brother, who married Catherine in 1509 after getting papal dispensation, because marrying your brother's widow was technically incestuous. For a while, it worked. Catherine was beloved by the English people, acted as regent when Henry waged war in France, and even crushed the Scots at Flodden Field. But then came the baby tragedy. 6 pregnancies. Only one surviving child, Mary Tudor. The others? Stillbirths, miscarriages, infants dead within weeks. Henry grew paranoid. Was God punishing them? The court whispered about the curse of their technically incestuous union. Modern geneticists suggest Rh incompatibility, a condition where the mother's immune system attacks fetal blood cells, often triggered by repeated pregnancies with the same partner. Here's the cruel twist. Catherine's own grandparents were cousins, meaning her blood carried generations of tightly wound DNA. When paired with Henry's, whose grandmother was also her aunt, the biological dice were loaded. A poignant detail: Catherine was a voracious reader, translating Latin texts and corresponding with Erasmus. Under house arrest at Kimbolton Castle, her last letter to Henry addressed him as "my most dear lord and husband," a staggering act of forgiveness or gaslit devotion. When and Boleyn entered the picture, Catherine's refusal to accept annulment wasn't just pride, it was theological conviction. Her stance fractured England from Rome and birthed the Anglican Church. All because one woman wouldn't lie about a marriage she'd been forced into at 15. Next, we meet Isabella of Portugal, whose marriage to Charles V takes cousin coupling to new heights. But first, light a candle for Catherine, the queen who gambled her soul on a sacrament and lost everything but her dignity. Now we step into the sun-drenched halls of 16th century Toledo, where Isabella of Portugal stands motionless in a shaft of golden light. A woman who didn't just marry her cousin, but her double first cousin, in what might be history's most genetically reckless royal wedding. Born in 1503, Isabella was the ultimate Habsburg matrimonial jackpot, daughter of King Manuel I of Portugal and Maria of Aragon, making her Catherine of Aragon's niece. When she married Charles V in 1526, the Holy Roman Emperor who ruled half of Europe, their shared ancestry would make a genealogist weep. Let's unpack this chromosomal car crash. Charles's parents were Joanna the Mad and Philip the Handsome. Isabella's mother Maria was Joanna's sister, meaning both sets of grandparents were Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. Their inbreeding coefficient hit 0.25, the genetic equivalent of siblings having a child. The wedding itself was all velvet and vows, but the marriage? Surprisingly loving. Charles, usually as emotionally expressive as a suit of armor, actually missed Isabella when traveling. He even remained faithful, a Habsburg miracle. Yet biology doesn't care about power couples. Of their 7 children, only 3 survived infancy, including the future Philip II of Spain, whose sunken eyes and protruding jaw would become Habsburg hallmarks. Isabella herself began fading young, fainting during religious processions, plagued by what doctors called womb melancholy. Modern scholars suspect postpartum depression or an autoimmune disorder. She died at 36 in 1539, mid-sentence in a letter about grain taxes. Charles, the man who conquered continents, wore black for the rest of his life and took up clockmaking in grief, because nothing says mourning like meticulously assembling tiny gears. Here's the tragic irony. Isabella's bloodline, so carefully guarded, produced Philip II, who'd later marry his niece Anna of Austria, then his cousin Mary I of England. The dynasty kept doubling down on genetic debt until the bank foreclosed. A haunting artifact, Isabella's cipher wheel, used to encode diplomatic letters, sits in a Madrid museum, its brass rings still locked in the position she last turned them. Like her DNA, the mechanism was perfectly engineered, yet destined to jam. Next, we'll see how Maria of Burgundy's horseback tragedy accidentally handed the Habsburgs their empire. But first, consider Isabella's legacy. The moment Europe's mightiest dynasty looked at their gene pool and decided to keep swimming deeper. Now the scene shifts to 1477 Burgundy, where Mary of Burgundy's fatal horseback ride sends shockwaves through Europe, because when a 25-year-old duchess dies from a spooked horse, empires get redistributed like a medieval game of Monopoly. Mary wasn't just any noblewoman. As the only child of Charles the Bold, she inherited the richest lands in Europe, the Burgundian Netherlands, a glittering prize wedged between France and the Holy Roman Empire. Her marriage prospects triggered a continental frenzy, with King Louis XI of France demanding she wed his son. Enter Margaret of York, Mary's stepmother, who wasn't about to let France swallow Burgundy whole. In a political masterstroke, she engineered Mary's marriage to Maximilian of Habsburg, an alliance that would funnel Burgundy's wealth straight into Habsburg coffers. The wedding was lavish, the marriage brief. Mary died 5 years later in a hunting accident when her horse tripped and crushed her. But in that short time, she'd given birth to Philip the Handsome, father of Charles V, Margaret of Austria, future governor of the Netherlands. Thus, through sheer biological luck, the Habsburgs acquired an empire because one woman fell off a horse. The genetic time bomb. Mary and Maximilian were distant cousins, not extreme by 15th century standards, but another stitch in the tightening tapestry. Their son Philip would later marry Joanna the Mad, creating the ultimate genetic storm in Charles V. A macabre postscript. When Mary's tomb was opened in the 20th century, archaeologists found her spine visibly shattered, exactly as chroniclers described. Her death wasn't just personal tragedy, it was the pivot on which Europe turned. Next, we'll witness Anna of Austria marry her uncle Philip II in a union so incestuous even the Vatican coughed discreetly. But first, pour one out for Mary, the woman who built an empire with her womb and lost it to a muddy ditch. Now we enter the candlelit gloom of 16th century Madrid, where Anna of Austria kneels at the altar to marry her uncle, Philip II of Spain, in a ceremony so incestuous it makes the Vatican's dispensation letters smell like burnt parchment. At 17, Anna was already a Habsburg veteran, daughter of Emperor Maximilian II and Maria of Spain, Philip's sister, making her both Philip's niece and cousin through multiple crisscrossing bloodlines. Their 1570 wedding wasn't just political, it was biological déjà vu, with the same genetic material being shuffled for the fourth consecutive generation. Philip, 43 and on his fourth marriage, needed an heir. His previous wives, including Mary I of England and Elizabeth of Valois, had left him with one sickly son, Don Carlos, who was so unstable Philip eventually imprisoned him. Anna, with her pure Habsburg blood, seemed the perfect solution. The marriage paradox. Surprisingly affectionate, Philip reportedly adored her. Produced 5 children for survived infancy, including future Philip III. Yet accelerated the dynasty's physical decline. Anna's letters reveal a sharp mind slowly suffocating under protocol. She collected saintly relics obsessively, fingernail clippings from martyrs, threads from the Virgin's veil, as if trying to borrow holiness for her cursed womb. When she died in 1580, childbirth, again, Philip's grief was uncharacteristically public. He wore black for life, kept her portrait beside him, never remarried. But the damage was done. Their son Philip III inherited his parents' shared recessive traits, lethargy, depression, and a jawline that looked like it was melting. Under his weak rule, Spain's global dominance began unraveling. A chilling detail, Anna's autopsy noted her uterus was withered like an autumn leaf, a poetic autopsy finding that probably masked generations of inbreeding damage. Next, we'll meet Margaret of Austria. No, not that one, who somehow rules the Netherlands while her family's genes spiral. But first, consider Anna's legacy. The moment the Habsburgs looked at their collapsing gene pool and decided to keep diving. Now the spotlight swings to Margaret of Austria, the other one. A woman who proved you could rule an empire while your family's genetics played Jenga with chromosomes. Born in 1584, this Margaret was granddaughter of that Anna of Austria, meaning she entered the world with Habsburg blood already thicker than Spanish molasses. Her father was Charles II of Styria, her mother Maria Anna of Bavaria, another classic case of royal families swapping the same genetic deck. At 15, she was married off to Philip III of Spain, her first cousin, naturally, becoming queen of a court where the air smelled of incense and slow decay. Every portrait seemed to feature the same elongated chin. Her husband's chief skill was napping through council meetings. But here's the twist, Margaret didn't just endure, she governed. When Philip III, whose idea of economic reform was praying for gold, proved incompetent, Margaret reformed tax collection, patronized Velasquez, secretly negotiated with Dutch rebels, all while producing 8 children in 10 years, 5 survived, including Anne of Austria, future Queen of France and mother of Louis XIV. The genetic roulette. Her daughter Maria Anna married Emperor Ferdinand III, her uncle. Son Philip IV married his niece Mariana. Yes, that Mariana. Every birth was a dice roll between genius and disability. Margaret died at 26 in 1611, officially from childbirth complications, though whispers suggested mercury poisoning from beauty treatments. Her legacy? The last competent Habsburg ruler before the dynasty's great genetic unraveling. A telling artifact. Her cipher wheel, more sophisticated than Isabella's, now sits and used in Vienna, like the Habsburgs' once brilliant DNA, too convoluted to function. Next, we'll witness Mariana of Austria marry her nephew and birth Europe's most inbred monarch. But first, light a candle for Margaret, the queen who threaded statecraft through her family's unraveling genes. Now we descend into the 17th century Spanish court's velvet gloom, where Mariana of Austria kneels at the altar to marry her nephew, Philip IV of Spain, in a ceremony so biologically reckless it makes Darwin's ghost face palm. Born in 1634, Mariana was the daughter of Emperor Ferdinand III and Maria Anna of Spain, Philip IV's sister. This made her Philip's niece, his first cousin once removed, carrier of the same Habsburg Jaw from both parents. Their 1649 marriage was arranged when Mariana was 15 and Philip 44, a union less about love and more about keeping Habsburg blood pure, like some deranged royal kennel club. The childbearing gauntlet. 5 pregnancies in 8 years. Only 2 survived, Margaret Theresa, future empress, and Charles II. Yes, that Charles II. Mariana's letters reveal a woman drowning in dynastic duty. I endure each confinement like a soldier marching to a battle already lost. When Philip died in 1665, Mariana became regent for 3-year-old Charles, a child so genetically compromised he couldn't chew solid food, had seizures resembling demonic possession, didn't speak until age 4, yet she ruled Spain for a decade, battling French invasions, court factions calling her the Austrian witch. The slow horror of watching her son's body betray him. A chilling detail, Mariana's portrait pendants show her face aging decades in just years, the eyes growing hollow, the Habsburg Jaw more pronounced, as if the dynasty's decay was etching itself onto her skin. She died in 1696, outliving Charles by 4 years, long enough to see her life's work unravel. Her legacy? The mother of Europe's most inbred monarch, and the woman who held an empire together while her family's genes came apart at the seams. Next, we'll meet Charles II himself, the human crescendo of this genetic symphony. But first, consider Mariana's tragedy. She didn't just witness the collapse, she birthed it. Now we arrive at the grotesque crescendo of this genetic opera, Charles II of Spain, a king whose very body became a museum of Habsburg dysmorphia. Born in 1661 to uncle-niece parents Philip IV and Mariana of Austria, his existence answered the question, what happens when a dynasty treats chromosomes like a closed-loop recycling system? The numbers don't lie. Inbreeding coefficient, 0.25, equivalent to sibling offspring. 8 out of 8 great-grandparents descended from Joanna the Mad and Philip the Handsome. Family trees shaped like a wreath. From birth, Charles was a medical marvel in the worst way. Couldn't chew, jaw misalignment. Didn't walk until age 8. Suffered epileptic fits courtiers called the devil's dances. Had a tongue so large it slurred his speech. Yet at 4, he was crowned king because divine right cares not for biology. His 2 marriages, first to Marie Louise of Orleans, then Maria Anna of Neuburg, produced 0 heirs, not surprising when his autopsy later noted testicles atrophied like raisins. The court's desperation. Physicians prescribed ground wolf bones. Nuns draped him in relics of dead saints. An exorcist claimed to extract 3 demons from his colon. Meanwhile, Mariana ruled as regent while Europe circled like vultures. When Charles finally died in 1700 at 38, his autopsy report read like a horror novel. Heart the size of a peppercorn. Lungs corroded. Skull full of water. His death triggered the War of Spanish Succession, dismantling Habsburg dominance. The ultimate irony? The dynasty that obsessed over purity died from too much of it. Next, we'll trace how Elizabeth Farnese tried to scrub Habsburg stains from Spain's throne. But first, let Charles's ghost linger, a monarch who couldn't rule his bowels, let alone an empire. Now the stage shifts to 1714, where Elizabeth Farnese strides into Madrid like a genetic decontamination team. A woman determined to scrub the Habsburg stains from Spain's throne with Italian vigor and a 23-sibling-strong fertility resume. Born in 1692 to the Duke of Parma and his cousin Dorothea Sophia of Neuburg, Elizabeth wasn't just another royal bride, She was Philip V of Spain's second cousin in the Dynasties' Hail Mary pass after Charles II's genetic apocalypse. Their marriage was less about love and more about chromosome diversification, like introducing a wolf into an inbred poodle kennel. The reboot attempt. For 7 children in 10 years, 6 survived. Imported Italian art and pasta to combat Spanish flu, essentially ruled through her depressive husband. But Elizabeth's real legacy was rewriting the family playbook. Married son Charles III to a Saxon princess. Shipped grandson Ferdinand VI off to marry a Portuguese cousin, slightly less related than usual. Made Farnese Ichin the new Habsburg Jaw. A telling moment. When courtiers suggested marrying her daughter to another Habsburg, Elizabeth reportedly threw a porcelain vase and screamed, "We are not livestock," in 3 languages. Yet even she couldn't fully escape. Her son Philip inherited epilepsy, a Farnese family trait now blending with residual Habsburg damage. By the time Elizabeth died in 1766, Spain's royal family looked healthier, if you ignored the twitching. Next, we'll see Maria Theresa of Austria try to fix 400 years of bad decisions with 16 children. But first, toast to Elizabeth, the woman who looked at a gene pool full of piranhas and decided to swim anyway. Now we enter the 18th century Habsburg court in Vienna, where Maria Theresa of Austria wages a one-woman war against genetic entropy, armed with 16 children and enough political savvy to make Machiavelli blush. Born in 1717 to Emperor Charles VI and Elizabeth Christine of Brunswick, Maria Theresa was the product of slightly diluted Habsburg blood. Her parents were merely second cousins, practically strangers by family standards. When she inherited the throne in 1740, Europe scoffed. No woman had ever ruled the Holy Roman Empire. So she did what any sensible monarch would, married her love match Francis Stephen of Lorraine, then used their children as diplomatic napalm. The fertility gambit. 11 daughters, 5 survived. 5 sons, 2 survived. Strategic marriages scattered from France to Naples. But here's the twist. Maria Theresa broke the inbreeding cycle. Mostly. While she still married daughter Marie Antoinette to Louis XVI, her second cousin, other children wed. Leopold to his Spanish Bourbon, third cousin. Maria Carolina to Ferdinand IV of Naples, no shared grandparents. A telling diary entry, God forgive me for risking fresh blood, but empires cannot run on cousins alone. Yet even she couldn't escape biology entirely. Of her 16 pregnancies, for stillbirths, 3 children dead before age 10. Son Joseph too inherited her migraines and depressive streaks. When smallpox took her beloved Francis in 1765, Maria Theresa donned perpetual mourning, but kept ruling in a black gown that became her trademark, like some imperial widow spider. Her legacy? The last great Habsburg, who proved dynasties could outbreed their way back from the brink, if they dared. Next, we'll witness Marie Antoinette's doomed attempt to straddle 2 gene pools. But first, pour one out for Maria Theresa, the mother who parented an empire back to health. Now we arrive at Versailles in 1770, where Marie Antoinette floats through gilded halls like a doomed butterfly. Her very existence a genetic compromise between Habsburg jawbones and Bourbon noses, destined to please nobody. At 14, the Austrian Archduchess was married off to Louis XVI, her second cousin, in a last-ditch effort to cement Franco-Austrian relations. On paper, it was a masterstroke. Her mother Maria Theresa's Habsburg political genius. His Bourbon lineages, relatively, fresh blood. But biology doesn't do diplomacy. Marie's struggles mirrored her dynasty's decay. Took 7 years to consummate the marriage. Louis's possible phimosis versus her aversion. First child Marie Therese was healthy, minor miracle. Subsequent pregnancies ended in miscarriage, stillbirth, and Louis Joseph died at 7 from tuberculosis. The court whispered about Habsburg infertility. Never mind that Louis's ancestors included Charles II's niece. When revolution came, Marie's Austrian blood made her the perfect scapegoat. A macabre footnote. After her execution in 1793, witnesses noted her hair had turned white at 37, as if the accumulated stress of dynastic failure had finally crystallized. Next, we'll examine how Queen Victoria accidentally spread hemophilia across Europe. But first, Let Marie's ghost linger, a woman caught between two failing gene pools, dancing toward the guillotine. Now we cross the channel to 19th century England, where Queen Victoria, a woman who famously declared, "We are not amused," unwittingly became the typhoid Mary of royal hemophilia, proving that even healthy dynasties carry genetic landmines. Born in 1819 to the House of Hanover, Victoria benefited from her family's relatively diverse gene pool. Her parents were merely third cousins, practically strangers by Habsburg standards. Her 1840 marriage to Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, her first cousin, was touted as a love match, but the science tells a darker story. The genetic domino effect. Carrier of hemophilia B, likely spontaneous mutation, passed it to son Leopold, died at 30 from a minor fall. Daughters Alice and Beatrice spread it to Russian, Spanish, and German royalty. Victoria's descendants would include Alexei Romanov, whose bleeding episodes helped destroy Imperial Russia, Alfonso XIII of Spain's hemophiliac heirs, a full 10 European thrones touched by the royal disease. The cruel irony? Victoria's reign symbolized Britain's genetic salvation, outbreeding the madness that plagued continental royals, while her DNA sowed new chaos. A chilling artifact, her journal entries celebrating Leopold's birth, perfect in every way. Unaware his blood lacked clotting factor 9. Next, we'll see how Princess Alex of Hesse carried Victoria's curse to Rasputin's Russia. But first, consider this. The queen who ruled an empire couldn't control her own chromosomes. Now we reach the 20th century's grim finale, where Princess Alex of Hesse, Queen Victoria's granddaughter, carries the hemophilia curse straight into the Romanovs' gilded slaughterhouse, proving that genetic destiny cares nothing for revolutions. Born in 1872, Alex inherited Victoria's mutation and married Tsar Nicholas II in 1894 after converting to Orthodoxy, becoming Alexandra Fyodorovna. Their son Alexei's diagnosis transformed Russian history. Rasputin's rise, his miraculous ability to stop bleeds. Political destabilization, Alexandra's obsession with healers. Ultimately, the Bolshevik bullet that ended the dynasty. Alex's letters reveal a mother's torment. Every bruise is a knife through my heart. Yet she never grasped that the real villain wasn't revolutionaries, but a tiny X-chromosome defect from her grandmother's DNA. The final irony? The Bolsheviks executed Alex and Alexei in 1918, unaware they'd just eliminated hemophilia from Russia's gene pool. Epilogue. Modern testing confirmed Victoria's mutation, F9 gene variant C.1009G greater than T, still lingers in European nobility. The last royal carrier? Prince Waldemar of Prussia, who died in 1945, his life prolonged only by American blood transfusions. So ends our tour through royal DNA's Hall of Mirrors, where power, love, and biology collide with consequences no crown can control.